I'll start by saying my talk is going to be the opposite of John's, partly because I'm not nearly as well prepared. I'm going to play a few slides here the way a DJ plays a playlist. I'm going to fish out things that I want to show you. Well, and secondly, because, well, look, John started by talking about his job and being nothing like ours. I guess that is my job. That's one of my clients. Jade, he's a product manager at a company actually a company that has lots of locations. He happens to be in Montana. You can tell because of the beard. But his world looks like that. And that's the people that I work with. But as I was listening to John, I was sort of struck that I do exactly the same thing John does. Except, well, not exactly. I do exactly the same thing John's fourth grade teachers do. I teach software developers narrative sequence and descriptive language and how to compare and contrast the different people who use their product, how to start thinking of them from the outside. It's a little weird that I'm doing the same thing fourth grade teachers do except with grown-ups. I want to go back to that starting slide. This is an old Dilbert cartoon. I can't imagine you can read it from the back. You should look it up. But the thing you can't read from the back is the copyright date on that is 2003. The idea of user stories or stories, look, Dilbert was making fun of them in 2003. And look, I'm going to spend, let me get back on track here. Look, I'm going to spend the next 30 minutes ranting about user stories. Some of you may want to go grab and coffee. You don't have to stay here for the whole thing. I'm sure you've heard it before. And I'm going to start, look, I go to too many conferences and I travel way too much, and I was in London a couple weeks ago, and I gave a workshop at a conference called UX London. I followed behind this guy. I gave a workshop in the afternoon. I had to stand next to him to introduce our workshops together. That's John Kolko. He's written a couple different books. Good speaker, talks about cool stuff. He was talking about, we're in the product portion of the day. He's talking about product management, and as a lot of user experience people do, he's risen to a level where he's responsible for a lot more than just the UI design. He's responsible for the product direction and strategy of his whole company. He described his journey, and extracting a couple slides from his deck, he described the work he was doing with my edu. He was talking about how he's helping college students better promote themselves or advertise themselves online, helping them get jobs. And he described, a simple flow of adding a skill to your profile. And he described the flow and adding options to it, and he told a nice step-by-step narrative. He then said, look, when you add a skill, this is what it looks like. And then in the middle of his talk, and I've seen him give this talk twice now, a couple of weeks later, I saw him at a conference giving the same talk, another conference in San Francisco called Mind the Product. And he gets to this point in the talk where he says, okay, we figure all this stuff out, and then we put these stupid user stories into Jira, and you go into Agile hell. And he he puts up this Jira screen from their company, and it has this long bunch of junk there, and it just makes my heart sink. It's that Dilbert cartoonish kind of thing. It's what went wrong from stories from the outset. So I want to talk about Agile stories and how they went pretty much sideways from the very beginning. How many who's here from Pivotal Labs? Oh Jesus Christ. Why is this looking bad? I can't. We're back enough. The reason I asked about Pivotal Labs is I've been in software development for about a decade, and in 2000, I was, throughout the 90s and up to 2000, I was working for a company that built software for brick and mortar retailers. one of the executives at my company left in 2000 and joined a startup, and he he poached me to come there because I had built successful products. The company was founded in downtown San Francisco, and their secret weapon was this new process called extreme programming. They'd hired this guy named Kent Beck, the guy who wrote the book on extreme programming, and the guy who came up with this concept of stories, or what are now called user stories. The reason I asked about Pivotal Labs and who was here at Pivotal Labs, because look, my boss and my coach, the guy that I was a little bit nervous about pair programming with, was a guy named Rob Mee. Rob Mee is a guy that went on to found Pivotal Labs later on. Later on, after that company kind of imploded because it was just building a stupid product. Look, whether that's what kind of got me fired up about the stuff that has to work outside of Agile development. But one of the things I learned from the very get-go was what user stories were supposed to be about. Now, user stories are supposed to solve two big problems. Sorry, I'm jumping here. One of those big problems that user stories was supposed to attack was this whole idea of written requirements. In fact, if people are old enough to remember, people used to joke that we're using an agile process now. We don't have to write any documents. That's not exactly the way it works, but there is an inherent problem with writing documents. Now, a lot of people, I'm just going to pick off a couple slides to show the silly examples I'll use in my book. And because they get laughs, I'll show these examples to start classes a lot. Look, imagine someone in your office you're holding a going away party for someone in your office. You call up and order a cake. They say, what would you like on the cake? You say, look, can you put on it So Long Alicia in purple and put stars around it? You pick up the cake. This is what you get. This is a cake from Cake Rex. The important thing about that cake is it meets the requirements. It's exactly what was written down. You should visit Cake Rex if you haven't. This is the cover of the side author's first book. She's got 2 books. However many books I sell, she will sell many more times that. There's a lot more broad appeal in that. But there's a lot of examples of what she calls literals, things where people literally do what was written down. This means, no, we don't have sprinkles. This is the non-functional requirement. Now, part of the reason this is funny is because we know that this shit really happens. If you've been on the outside of software development, it's this. If I touch that, this is funny. You can go away. Actually, if you want to stay here, I'm gonna. This is funny because it really happens. I've coached, over the years, I've coached and worked with a lot of teams. I've done a lot of this stuff myself. When you hand off something to someone and they build it, you're pretty sure you explained it perfectly in what you wrote down, and what comes back is a shock. Has anybody had that shock before? Look, this is the problem that Kent was trying to solve. It's this problem where we all read the same thing, but we imagine different things, and we read it through whatever filters we've got, and everything's not there. Kent has this disruptively simple idea to fix this problem, and that's just to stop it. And it's to stop exchanging documents and to tell me your story. Look, he described this super simple process flow. Write something down on a card. That's it. Because you'll come back you will sit down with someone who's going to build something, and then you will tell your story. And it's in the context of telling that story that we will get our heads in sync, that we'll get on the same page. I need to remind people that stories get their name from how we use them, not how we write them. That's the mistake number one. And look, what we're trying to do here is to clear up this problem where we talk. Well, what I've learned over the years is it isn't just talking. We may talk about the same thing, we may read the same document, but if we're just talking, sometimes we still run into this problem. It's when we externalize our thinking, when we visualize it, when we put it out there where people can see it, that we start to detect, I see it differently than you do. And most of the time, what we find out isn't that one person's right and one person's wrong, it's that we all have pieces of the puzzle. It's when we put them together and combine and refine that we come up with something different. What we're managing too, or what's going on in those conversations, those productive conversations, is we're building this intangible state, less tangible state called shared understanding. And that word is kind of catching on as a mantra, and this pithy quote, shared documents aren't shared understanding. Look, that's the thing that we're fighting. And oddly, that's what I saw John Kolka doing, was converting his concrete understanding into this long, nasty narrative document and complaining about it. It sucked for him. I'm pretty confident it sucked for the people that had to read that document. Mr. Nodder will recognize this particular picture because he and I got a chance to work together to work with this particular client. And I'll show this a lot to show, look, this is what it looks like when you're trying to build shared understanding. It's a lot of talking and gesturing, and it's using words. There's Lane's picture I've stolen. It's lots of things like this that help us build shared understanding. And I like to show this particular picture. This guy's name is Sharif. He's a product manager at Atlassian. People familiar with Atlassian? Pivotal people, I'm sure, are familiar with Atlassian because they make a competitive product. Atlassian makes a product called Jira. That's what John was kind of making fun of. When I walk around most Agile environments, what I see on the wall are lots of things that John mentioned, task boards, burn down charts, the stuff that shows if we're making progress. When I walk around Atlassian, I don't see any of that crap because they use Jira. It's in Jira. Why would you do that? But their walls are absolutely covered with stuff, but the walls their stuff is covered with are the things that show what people are doing in their software. They're the step-by-step walkthroughs. They're the things they can point to. They're the things that help them build this intangible state of shared understanding. I see lots of pictures like that. Now, it's worth talking about. One of the things that's caught on in explaining this, and how many people here have read the story mapping book or seen it a little bit? There's enough of you that this is probably a repeat for, but for people that are new to this, I remind people, this is an iteration of everything. Every good turn of phrase I stole from someone and iterated a bit. Look, the things we prepare, the documents we create have the quality of a vacation photo. To explain to you what I mean, I have to show one of my vacation photos. Those are my two daughters. We're on a beach in Hawaii. If I share that with you, you say, oh, that looks nice. That looks like fun, cute girls, other polite things. But when I see that picture, I remember that on this particular trip to Hawaii, all the beaches were really rocky or really crowded. It sucked, and kids wanted to swim in the hotel pool. I paid too much to be here to swim in the hotel pool. I found a good place to go on TripAdvisor. They said it was a little hard to get to. That translated to an hour's drive over a four-wheel drive trail in a rental Ford Mustang. This is a stupid idea. When we get there, there's a parking lot, not many cars in there. That's a good sign. We get out, we look for the beach. There's no beach. There's a long foot trail over more lava rock. If you've got kids, you know how this is going. My kids are saying, can we just please go back and swim in the hotel pool? I'm saying, as any good father would, I said, no, we're going to that beach. And we got there, hardly any people there. Because there's few people, there's lots of fish in the water. There's turtles up on the sand, turtles in the water. It was a great day. Now, how could you possibly know that? You can't, because you weren't there. And there's a lot of information that looking at this picture helps me remember. And there's a lot of information that looking at that picture helps the people that created that remember. I want to remind people that these conversations are about building shared documents. The best documents are the ones that help us recall those conversations. The way we share them is the way I just shared that vacation photo with you. Now, the other thing, look, I constantly draw this model, and I'll cut to the chase with it. It's this model that, it's this simple now and later model. I first heard this language from somebody at an IXDA talking about, well, the difference between, look, we find people with problems, that gives us ideas about what we could build. When we ship it and something comes out, well, what we refer to, all that stuff that happens after things come out is outcome. That's why it has that name. And, well, it's understanding the difference between output, what we describe to other people to build and what we build, and outcome, what happens afterwards. And then the long-term impact of that, how we generate return on investment or change brand. It's this idea that, well, if we're going to, I'll make the point, and I'll make it again now, that there are way more ideas. I tell the off-color joke. I was sitting in a room with a marketing and advertising company, and we were doing some collaborative ideation, and we came up with lots of ideas. And one of the big cheeses in the room said, well, you know, we came up with lots of ideas and we filtered it down, and we're going to go forward with one of these. What do we do with all those other ideas that we came up with? They're all valuable. And he said that they're kind of like sperm cells. They could all fertilize an egg and turn into something really big. And I said, I don't know about you, man, but I don't keep mine. I can make more. There are way too many ideas, and ideas are cheap. It's the stuff that happens after that matters. And the problem we're managing is how to really do more with those ideas. There's a rant that I'll do that we start calling those ideas requirements, and because of that stupid dictionary definition, we think that requirements means it's required. But no, it's just an idea. And let's go back to the story thing, and then I'll give you the story mapping thing. This is Kent Beck. You know, I first learned about stories and extreme programming from this first book on stories, and that came out in 99, 2000, I think was the published date on that originally, but the second edition came out in 2004. Now the second edition goes a little bit deeper, it goes a little bit broader, explains things with a lot more variability, but in it he defines this concept called stories. Kent will make punch the point in discussion with me. He punched the point that I did not call them user stories. I call them stories because this is the way we're supposed to work. Can and should be about users, but they refer to the way we work together. They don't refer to what's written down, and it's important that people are talking. That's what matters. And then in introducing the concept, he says, software development has been steered wrong by the word requirement, defined in the dictionary as something mandatory or obligatory. The word carries a connotation of absolutism and permanence, inhibitors to embracing change, and the word requirement is just plain wrong. What the two benefits we're meant to get out of user stories are we're meant to be talking with each other and really understanding what we're building and who it's for and why, and we're meant to open up the conversation about what else we should build. We're meant to really talk about who needs it, what they need, and why, and we're meant to throw away more stupid stuff. We're meant to build stuff that really helps and really matters. So part of this whole story conversation is the thinking it through thing. Let me show you one last Cake-Rex example because this one's actually is funny. But brace yourselves. This is a cake for a baby shower. Now, if we were describing a cake, you could all agree this is a work of art. It's not square, it's not shaped like a pan, it doesn't use frosting, the color that comes out of the can. It's beautiful, but if you think this through from a usage perspective, look at what do you use a cake for, and what is that whole wedding shower experience going to be like? And this is a real groove killer. If I serve chicken for dinner and ask if you want a thigh or a breast, that's one thing. But if I ask if you want a butt cheek or a slice of head, that's not not good. Now, look, there was that whole idea we should be talking with each other and passing things off. One of the first things we encounter is the size problem. Well, let's talk about, first we lost the plot. As humans, we want to rely on a document, we want to hand things off, because as it turns out, we really do not like talking to each other that much. And we don't know exactly how to solve those problems, because if we weren't the ones that got out there and talked to the users, we don't know what would be better for them. And I've been in so many conversations where we're meant to talk about the users, but no one in the conversations knows. I'm going to continue the rant, and I'm going to I'm going to go directly to Godwin's law here. People familiar with Godwin's law? Okay. So I looked for the happiest Nazi picture I could figure out or find. First, when we talk about misusing stories, there's the template Nazi. There's the one, sorry, I want to go back here. The person who insists on writing things in the as I want to so that format. This is the training wheels for the new user story writer. This helps them figure out how to write good user stories. And when I see people using it, I might look at it the same way I see someone using training wheels. I think, great, they're learning to ride a bicycle. But there's no training wheels. You don't see training wheels in Tour de France. Stop that, start having productive conversations, and that's not the story. There are the people that insist on that whole prioritized backlog thing, that we break stories down into lots of little parts and build one part at a time. In fact, every tool that we use enforces putting things in this list where important things to build are at the top. And those important things are just what's next in the queue. And this gets us to the size problem, that the important thing, or that next thing in the queue, has got to be something small, something that the team can tackle inside a sprint. In fact, we ought to be able to tackle a bunch of these in a sprint. It ought to be just a few days. And people will tell you that's not a good story because it is not small. And then, even worse, it's got to be small, but it's not supposed to have any details in it. We're supposed to just have the basic stuff because we're meant to talk about all those details. We're meant to figure them out later. Now, I don't know about you, but when we come up with great ideas to help people do things, they're not little things that are ready to go in the next sprint. So I spend a lot of my time trying to help people understand that story concept, that talking to each other thing, well, that's a way to work, and we can do that about big things and little things. We eventually do want to get them down to little things. And that talking about outcome versus output thing, that's something to do. Well, we start that at the very beginning. Let's go back. This is a story map. It's moronically simple. When I talk to somebody about what they're doing, I'll say, let's think this through. Who's doing it? And let's tell a story about what they would do, step by step. Well, first they would do these steps, and then we give some kind of a simple narrative, what we call a journey map, what we call, a lot of different names for this thing. I kind of thought this was, in early days, I might have thought I invented something, but there's so many people doing the same thing, it's hard to call it an invention. And then we start breaking it down into parts. This is a picture I've used for a long time, and it's in my book, but the important part for you guys to know about the picture is this is someone who fell into the bad Agile problem. The guy had an idea for a startup. He got the best developers he could. They told him, we're going to work with an Agile process. We're going to put all your stuff. I heard John say, gosh, I wish we had put everything into a backlog and started iterating through it in his previous talk, and I was wincing and going, gosh, I'm so glad that you didn't, because if you had, things would have gone the way they did for Gary. He broke things down into little parts. They started building parts. Weeks went by, months went by, and Gary figured out, wow, this is taking a long time. I don't like this Agile stuff at all. Can we please do something else? The person Gary was working with called me up and said, Jeff, can you go talk some sense into Gary? And I showed up and we started a conversation. My first conversation was big. It was the big framing of this thing. What is this? Who is it for? Why would you build this? How do you benefit from it? And because we're externalizing our thinking as we talk, because we write and put things out there where we can both see them, they end up as cards on the floor. They could be sticky notes. We go into deeper conversation about who his users are, who he assumes they are and what their goals are. And then because Gary's got this pretty strong vision for the product, I say, well, let's imagine this thing shipped. Imagine it's later. And let's tell a story step by step about what they would be doing. Imagine life for them. And we tell a story, and it doesn't take very long before Gary starts scratching his head and saying, I hadn't thought about what happens between there and there. And, well, we should think about that. And when we come to a part where Gary has really given a lot of thought, a lot of details spill out down below. All those details that spill out down below are things that we could potentially build in a next iteration, but it's the talking through it this way that helps Gary see the big picture. It's at the tail end of this, and I know you want me to, I'm going to give a couple punchlines and then we'll kill it. It's the talking through things big like this that helps Gary realize, I am building the wrong thing. I've spent a couple months building something that I don't want to build, and out of this conversation, there is something I do want to build. Very few startups I work with have panned out. Gary's panned out. He grew to between 50 and 60 people. He was bought at the tail end of 2014 by GoDaddy to fatten up their portfolio on the way to going public. Gary is now seen as a product expert inside of GoDaddy, and is helping them to do things, but he's a musician. He was building a product to help musicians collaborate. Now, I've got more things to talk about. On the good side, look, this story mapping stuff is catching on, and if we're going to reverse the stupid crap that's happened over the last decade, people are having big whole conversations. I went through Twitter last night, and I just went back 30 days. These are the pictures I found in less than the last 30 days, people that have tweeted things, people that are tweeting pictures of what they've done with maps. It's more and more, this is getting pretty cool. The book is, these are illustrations from the book, annotated in Japanese. The book goes live in July. There's a fairly big following there. There's a lot more to talk about. I put a lot of things together and intended to ship this stuff. Let me give the last punchlines here. If I've got a big conclusion to make here, is that it ain't Story's fault. It's the fact that we've been working with processes for a long time that rely on us handing off things to each other. We get held responsible for doing our jobs, for building software, for designing user interface, and it's not our job to be the ones to figure out the problems. It's not our job to change things. It's our job to execute a lot. The Agile idea of stories helped us take a couple steps forward, but it's this inertia junk that's hard to change. It's hard to break a lot of those habits. This story mapping thing has helped us actually have the life-size story conversations, helps us get down to the little things to build the next sprint, but helps us think of that whole journey. But look, we've got a long way to go before sane product development is normal. And the stuff that we're talking about here, and the rise of lean startup and lean user experience and digital product management as a discipline helps. I mentioned 2 weeks ago I was at a conference called Mind the Product. The logo, the logo of the Scrum Alliance looks like the little Scrum double loop. The logo of Mind the Product is this Venn diagram. It is this, what's called the triad sometimes, this intersection of what's valuable, usable, feasible, and it is a nod to the fact that we need product people, user experience people, and engineers working closer together. That's it. I'm going to stop there. There is a lot more to talk about. Thanks very much.